which we think are appropriate, and then we're bringing in some tougher measures to stop the seeding, the rapid seeding of Omicron in this country, to give us the time to get the boosters in, and of course to find out more. So those measures, as you know, are the tough measures at the borders, the PCR test. When you arrive, quarantined until you've got a negative result, then tougher measures on masks, and they're making sure that contacts for anybody who comes into contact with an Omicron case also has to quarantine. We think that's the right balance. We will keep it, of course, under constant review. And I should say, of course, we've got tougher measures, even tougher measures for travel for those countries, for those 10 countries that seem to have particular problems with Omicron. Is that it? I think that was it. Good, thank you. Let's.
Amanda about the NHS.
Oh, sorry, Colin, go on. Sorry.
Thank you. Look, I think there is absolutely no doubt that this is the most complex part of the vaccine rollout programme so far. And NHS staff have done, I think, an incredible job. They've stepped up every time there's been a change and responded magnificently through the whole of the past year as the programme has expanded and changed. So I have absolutely no doubt that they will again. On winter, you're absolutely right to say there is significant pressure. I've mentioned some of the pressures on urgent emergency care, as well, of course, as continuing to try and deal with some of the backlogs that were inevitably created across the last 18 months of the pandemic. But whilst we are supporting them with that, we have said very consistently we are expecting this to be a difficult winter. But last year, let's not forget what they achieved, stood up to the second massive increase in COVID cases, began that life-saving, vital rollout of the vaccine programme, and of course dealt with all of the usual winter pressures as well. So I think we can take great comfort from what the NHS has done over the last year and a half, and certainly what I see across the NHS is a huge number of people pulling out absolutely all the stops to do the right thing for their patients.
Absolutely right. Emily Morgan of IIT.
Prime Minister, should people be taking your advice or the advice of one of your scientific advisors who said we should be limiting unnecessary social contacts? Can you see why people are confused? And to you, Amanda, even if you did 3.5 million booster jabs every single week, it would still take until mid-February, by my calculations, to get through all those who are eligible. How are you going to do it by the end of January?
Well, first of all, the guidance remains the same. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't take sensible precautions, and everybody should continue, for instance, to wash your hands and make sure that you have good ventilation and wear a mask when you're in a confined space with people you don't normally meet. What we're doing is we're toughening up the regulations in the specific ways that I've outlined to deal with Omicron, and I think that's the right approach. We're taking a balanced and a proportionate approach, but as I said, I think on Saturday, we still, but the most important thing is we still think that your best single protection against all variants is to get the booster, and I'm still confident that this Christmas will be considerably better than last Christmas. That remains my view 48 hours later. So, yes, Amanda, go on.
So, look, thank you. It is our clear intention to ensure that everyone who is eligible has a chance to book that booster by the end of January. In order to achieve that, I've set out a whole range of things we're going to be doing. There's no maximum to the number of jabs that we're aspiring to give a week on week, but what we do need to recognise is this is going to build up over the next few weeks, and inevitably there will be things that change and adapt as we go along, as has been the case all the way through the vaccination programme. But the range of things that I've set out does mean that we have confidence as we stand that we will be able to make sure that all of those people who are eligible will have that opportunity to book.
Great, thanks. Ben Kentish, LBC.
Thank you. Amanda, just briefly, to meet that target by the end of January, you need about 30 million doses. Could you just confirm that there's no issue with supply of the Pfizer and Moderna jabs when it comes to that? Health Secretary, if I could just ask you briefly about the restrictions that came in today. Governments in many European countries have advised their citizens to wear not just face coverings, but specific FFP2 or N95 medical grade masks because they're much better protecting both the wearer and the people around them. As the rules on masks are tightened today, would that be your advice to people here too? And Prime Minister, people could be forgiven this week for asking when this is all going to end. Obviously, we know it's not imminent, and the Omicron variant raises a lot of uncertainty. But can you give people some hope that the day when we won't have to wear masks, we won't have to test or quarantine, when restrictions can be lifted, when that day may come? Clearly there's uncertainty. It's been reported that government was planning initially for it to be potentially next March. Is that still the case, or does Omicron set that back?
Thank you. I think Amanda, you're first.
Well, look, thanks to the outstanding work of the Vaccine Task Force, I am reassured that we absolutely do have the supply we need.
Yeah, on the face coverings, so there's already guidance on face coverings, including the types of face coverings that are recommended, and we see no need to change that. I just want to touch, if I may, PM, on Vicky's question earlier on those that are unvaccinated. It's right to point to that. There's some 5 million people throughout the UK that haven't even had one jab, and they really are putting themselves in harm's way, and their loved ones. And we really urge them to come forward. And it is right also, when you look at hospital admissions, that it's a disproportionate number of people that haven't been vaccinated. Sadly, for example, if you look at all the pregnant women that are in hospital because of COVID, almost every single one is unvaccinated. So it's really important that people come forward, and that evergreen offer of a vaccine, whether it's your first dose or your second dose, will always be there. We're urging those people to come forward as well.
Ben, on your question, the crucial thing, the $64 million question, or $1 billion question, whatever, is does this new variant beat the vaccines, and does it beat particularly does it beat the booster? As I've said over the last few days, we think that the chances are that the boosters will continue to give you protection against every variant, of protection of some degree. That's why it's so absolutely vital to get the boosters. But we need to check that. We can't. This is what we think that we need to check that, and that's why we're waiting to see what the science tells us. What I can certainly tell you is that the measures that we've put in place will not last a minute more than we think they are strictly necessary for the protection of public health. Jason Rose, very much.
Thanks. Mr. Jefford, you said I think there's now 13 cases. Do you think it's likely that we are now seeing community transmission in England and the rest of the UK? Ms. Pritchard, could you tell us a little bit more about what the troops are going to be doing in this rollout? And obviously, you talked about a proportionate response, but we are seeing people responding to the news they're seeing by cancelling Christmas parties, scrapping nativity clothes. Would you urge them to think again and get this in perspective?
First of all, on cases, the cases that we identified at the weekend, the start of the weekend, we were able to confirm quickly that they were linked to travel to South Africa. They were also part of one sort of family cluster. The recent cases that we've confirmed today, we're not able to say whether or not, at this point, we don't know. We're doing that work right now at speed to determine whether they all have a link to South Africa or not. Is there likely to be community transmission? I think we have to be realistic. There is likely to be, as we're seeing in other European countries. And also, as I said earlier, that we would expect new cases to rise as we now actively look for cases, because now having identified the variant and our concerns around it, UK HSA is actively looking back at anyone who's travelled to South Africa over the last 10 days or so and searching for these cases and taking action, of course, if they find them.
So the NHS has had brilliant support all the way through this programme, whether that's from volunteers or from the military or partnership with a whole range of other community groups and local government. So, once again, we will be working with the military in a range of ways, everything from support logistics through to actually providing jabs. But I would just use this, if I may, as another big plea for people if they are interested in thinking about coming forward as a volunteer, because the volunteer workforce was critical all the way through the whole of the last year and really will be again. And I know that the incredibly dedicated staff who are working in the NHS really value the support that they get from that volunteer workforce and from those wider partners.
Thank you. Listen, Jason, just on your point about Christmas parties and nativity plays, we don't want people to cancel such events. And we think that overwhelmingly the best thing for kids is to be in school, as I've said many times throughout this pandemic. What we're doing is trying to take a balanced and proportionate approach to the particular risk that seems to be posed by Omicron, or certainly is posed by Omicron, focused in particular on measures at the borders, and we think that's the right way to go for the time being, until we know more and until we can get more boosters, as we've been saying, into people's arms. Can we go to Cameron Chileshi of DFT, please?
Just have a couple of questions on the new restrictions. So with the changes in the self-isolation rules, businesses in particular have warned of a second pandemic, with potential disruption to staff and that sort of thing. Is that inevitable as cases rise? And is there anything you can say to reassure businesses? And just another point, the government has ruled out Plan B, but can you confirm whether contingency measures are being in place, say for example, for work at home, for work from home measures ahead of Christmas? And can you rule out local restrictions, for example, if there is a surge of cases in one particular pocket of the country, for example?
Thanks very much, Jasmine. So just on the risk of where we were in July, the so-called pandemic, I don't think that is likely to happen, in the sense that so far at least the numbers of cases of Omicron are small, but we'll have to see, and we'll have to keep that constantly under review. On the issue you asked about local measures, I certainly think that we went round that a lot in the last year, and I think that we've settled pretty much on the view that having as far as you possibly can, moving together is the way to do it. Sorry, you had a middle question.
It was just that the government has ruled out Plan B, but are there
sorry. Thanks, Jasmine. We haven't ruled out anything. I've got to tell you, and I think another lockdown of the kind that we've had before is extremely unlikely. I'll be upfront with you about that. But we keep everything under constant review. In our fight against the Delta variant, we think that it's basically been going our way, or going the way that we planned. So you're seeing, although cases remain high or high-ish, you're seeing a decline in the numbers of admissions to hospital and a decline in the number of deaths, and that's the crucial thing that we've been following. So at the moment, we've seen a cause to move to Plan B, but as I've said to you many times before, we've got to keep that under review. But the measures we're talking about to deal with Omicron are as I've said, distinct. Last to Joe Mays of Bloomberg.
Prime Minister, just to press on the work from home point, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are all advising to work from home if people can. So what is your reasoning around the harms of working from home, and why those harms outweigh the public health benefits that could come from significantly reducing transmission or potentially dangerous variants? And just briefly on migrants, how do you plan to mend the UK's relationship with France, and when did you last speak to Emmanuel Macron about the crossings?
Thanks, Joe. So on your point about working from home, this is not something that we think currently is necessary. So for the reasons I gave to Jasmine, we've got a package of measures that we have in place to deal with the Delta variant. That's principally been rolling out the vaccine, and it's been working. And I repeat what I said just now about the numbers of deaths and hospitalizations coming down. We now have a particular issue to deal with the seeding of the potential seeding of the new Omicron variant. And there, what we want to do is focus particularly on tough measures at the borders. We're also doing something to stop transmission by reintroducing face masks in some settings, and continue to advise them in other settings, but tightening rules on face masks. And the reason for not proceeding, as it were, with a full Plan B, or proceeding with Plan B, is we want to take an approach that is proportionate and balanced and suits the needs of the present risk. And of course, we will change things as necessary, but what we're looking for is the first real reassurance that we need that the vaccines are efficacious against this variant. Even if the efficacy, the effectiveness is reduced, it's still very important to know that whether they're effective or not. And in particular, we need to know quite how effective the boosters are. As I've said, we think there are good grounds for believing that the boosters will give you, under all circumstances, the protection that you need, considerable protection. That's why the most important thing for everybody to do is go out and get your booster. That's the number one thing that people need to be doing. Thank you all very much. I just want to say something, because nobody's asked about it so far. I just want to say something about Storm Arwen and its effect on the north of the country. And I just want to say how the government. I'm extremely sympathetic to everybody who suffered these power outages, and it must be appalling. I think 1 million homes lost their electricity. 950,000 have seen that electricity now restored. But for 50,000 people, that is not good enough. And I want to reassure everybody that we're working as hard as we can to get power back to those homes. All I can say is that the gusts were going at 100 miles an hour, and talking to the people who operate the grid, they say that there was nothing that they could do about it. But we are doing everything we can to restore power, talking to Northern Power Grid and everybody else to get that fixed. And I appreciate it must be a very, very tough time for those homes that are currently without power. And I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So the end of the Number 10 briefing, the Prime Minister alongside the Health Secretary and the head of NHS England. Striking that the Prime Minister wanted to make those comments at the end about, as we know, thousands of people still without power in so many parts of the country after the storms. We'll have more on that in the next hour. Right now, we will, for a few minutes, as you would expect, concentrate on all the announcements we heard there. And the headline in terms of the booster programme is that everyone who is eligible for a COVID booster should have one by the end of January. That is the target that the Prime Minister and Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, laid out. Sajid Javid saying, I know this is asking a huge amount of the NHS, but I know they will rise to the challenge. That is what he said. And both men really interestingly stressing that while people might feel frustration about where we are and what we've been talking about over the last few days in particular, Boris Johnson said it is wrong to feel frustration. Remember, our situation is way better than it was 1 year ago. Let's assess everything we've heard there, and some interesting questions as well in that session. Our health correspondent Nick Triggle is with me. He's been listening to this throughout. So the target, Nick, the end of January, it's a big task. Can the NHS manage it?
It's ambitious, but I think it's achievable. I mean, crucially, and Amanda Pritchard, the NHS Chief Executive in England, said this, we have the supply. Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are in the country or going to come into the country, and there'll be enough to vaccinate the eligible adult population. But the NHS at the moment is not vaccinating at the rate it needs to hit that target. Currently, they're doing about 2.5 million boosters a week. So that would take till the end of February if it stayed at that rate. It's got to get back up to, and the Prime Minister acknowledged this, the levels we saw in the spring when more than 4 million doses a week were being given. Now, the problem facing the NHS is some of the infrastructure that was in place that has been dismantled. A third of the mass vaccination centres have closed. Many of the GPs who were instrumental in those early days are back doing their day-to-day work. What we're seeing is pharmacies step up and doing more, and that's why it's important they get more support, because the thing that limits them is staff. They've got limited staff. So we've heard about the military and other people coming in to support them. And the other interesting move was opening up the hospital hubs that have been concentrating on NHS staff to members of the public. There's 30 hospitals vaccinating members of the public at the moment, but there's a couple of hundred hospitals around the country that could open up their vaccination hubs to the public. So they're going to be crucial. If they manage to do all that and do that quickly, end of January is achievable.
Okay, I mean, I guess there's a lot of ifs and caveats, and I probably want to ask you questions that no one yet knows the answer to, because it's interesting that you mentioned those vaccination hubs. I mean, anyone who had any of their jabs in those, I mean, they were really run so well, they were really organised. You made the point there, dismantled. I mean, do we know, is there any prospect that some of those could be brought back up? I mean, what do we know about all of that?
I mean, it's very hard. Some of them were sort of conference venues, entertainment centres, and football stadiums that are being used for other things now. And I mean, I've been told logistically it's very hard to quickly restart a big vaccination centre. So that's why it's important to build on what we've got, extend the opening hours, put more support in place. And I think that's what we were hearing there. That's what their plan is. So what's in place can do more. And that's how we're going to get to
it. So it's the emphasis on pharmacies, it's 400 military personnel, and that is the target. Well, people like you will be watching that as it progresses. In terms of wider health measures, I think I lost count of the number of times the Prime Minister said proportionate. This is balanced and proportionate when he gets pushed on, well, why face coverings in one particular environment, for example, public transport, and not other settings. There's that sense, is there, of sort of steady as she goes, this is what we need right now. That was the Prime Minister's line.
It was. I mean, the problem that the government faces is that so much is uncertain about this new variant. So there's a risk of overreacting and underreacting. A lot of scientists I've spoken to feel that more or less it's a proportionate response, and by acting early we reduce the risk of more drastic action later. But what will be crucial is the work behind the scenes the scientists are doing to establish what impact this has on the vaccines, because of course the concern is that the new variant could reduce the effectiveness of the vaccines. Now, when we talk about effectiveness, there's two things. There's the ability of the vaccines to prevent infection. What we've seen with the variants that have happened, that we've seen in the past year, certainly with Delta, is that they reduce the effectiveness of the vaccines to protect individuals against infection, but they hold up very well against serious illness. But this variant, the Omicron variant, has more mutations than the other variants we've seen, and in particular, the part of the virus that the vaccines target. So the big concern is what will it do to the ability of the vaccines to protect against serious illness. There's no evidence yet it does affect that, but that is what they are looking at, and that really is what will be crucial to the sort of future prospects of this pandemic.
Yes. And before we let you go, Nick, a quick thought. I mean, there were some suggestions from the head of Moderna, which people, if they read them, perhaps might have even been a bit concerned, but equally, in the last little while, we've had Oxford University saying we have the necessary tools in place for the rapid development of an updated vaccine, should it be necessary. That takes us to your point there about the uncertainty that we're all in, still lots that's not known.
There is huge uncertainty. People say, well, why don't we update the vaccines? And I think the vaccine manufacturers have said that this could be done in 100 days to roll out, but then obviously you've got to get it into people's arms. But some of the scientists I've spoken to have said, actually, are you better to stick with the vaccine you've got? Because that was based on the original Wuhan strain, and that will sit at the centre of the map when it comes to variants. We're seeing new variants, and the problem is if you go chasing one variant at the edge of that map, you could have another variant that pops up on the other side, and if you've designed your vaccine for that, it's going to be much less effective on that one on the other side of the map. So maybe you're better off sticking with the vaccine that targets the original strain. But again, we have to wait and see what the scientists find out about this new variant and then react to that.
Yes. Well, we will talk about that again. Thank you very much for now, Nick Triggle, our health correspondent, who's been following all of that. Let's talk about the politics of it all as well, of course. And there's been votes in the Commons today as well. Our political correspondent, Chris Mason, joins me. And we were reflecting an hour or so ago, Chris, that tone was going to be really interesting to listen out for. What's your take on that hour from the Prime Minister?
Hello again, Jane. Tone and language and poring over the exact words, I think, chosen particularly by the politicians. Clearly, as you were reflecting just there, a huge amount of the focus in the news conference was the logistical exercise of cranking up the booster programme. But what about the impact on our liberties and what might happen in a few weeks' time? You noticed the key phrase that the Prime Minister kept falling back upon, a proportionate, precautionary set of measures. That was the phrase he kept coming back to again and again, a desire, as he put it, to try to be balanced. A couple of other quotes, and one particular one from Sajid Javid that few people are picking up on. The Health Secretary saying the best chance of a Christmas with loved ones is to roll up our sleeves. Literally roll up our sleeves when we're invited for a booster in England. One of the measures being implemented, in other words,